How can the confusion of a multitude of lost spirits be part of the so-called grand experiment? And how can these frail wraiths even be considered the finest of all the creations that came before, when by the very fact that they expire so quickly shows that they are flawed? And still, with all their faults, I can't understand why their cries can't be silenced, and they can be granted the peace they so desperately need.
For one who believes yourself to be a perfect being, you seem to be wallowing in your own misery, my friend.
Forgive me for questioning your design, but how can the creator of a perfect being create something so deniably flawed?
And what flaws would that be?
There are so many one hardly knows where to begin. They enter their existence with no defenses against a harsh and cruel environment, without the slightest idea of what lies ahead. And before they come to understand what their purpose is, they pass on to this plane of misery.
But a few of them do realize their purpose.
Yes, there are those who do realize, whether for good or bad. Those few go through their lives enriching or destroying the lives of their fellow beings. But in the blink of an eye, they depart the mortal coil the same as the rest.
And this frailty is what causes you such misery, the mere weakness of these imperfect creatures.
No. Well, yes, I do find it uncomforting. But my misery comes from listening to the constant cries of their lost and lonely souls. Some crying out for the chance to move on, to finally know the answers to life's questions.
But not all of them.
No. The multitude cry out for earthly pleasures left behind, for all the things they had left to do. And the rest, they cry out in fear, wondering if they'll be made to pay for their horrid deeds of a misspent life. But, saint or sinner, they all are made to endure this endless suffering.
So that is what troubles you.
Yes. No. What troubles me is, what is the point?
The point?
The point to all this. How can the suffering of what you call your finest work aid you in this, your so-called grand experiment?
And who are you, another of my fine creations, to question the grand experiment? My grand experiment.
It was not my intention to question your methods, only to be helped to understand them.
I owe you no explanation. Why do you need to understand it? Why do you even care?
Because it is in my nature to care. It was what I was created for. Or don't you remember?
Of course, I remember. I was wondering when you would.
You mean to say that all this, all that I've watched and lamented over for so very long, I cannot be a part of whatever you have planned?
not just a part of my design. You are the key. For millennia, I have pondered how to help the dead and the damned transcend to the next stage of what you refer to as my grand experiment. To help them myself would give away too much of the question. To not help them at all would delay the question's answer. So the only thing to do was to create a guide to lead them between the two worlds, to prepare them for what awaited behind the veil. For you see, it wasn't enough to create such a thing. I had to wait until such a time as to know that you cared enough to want to give aid to these sometimes flawed creatures. For the task you have unwittingly chosen can only be carried out by someone with the highest sense of compassion, the ability of great understanding, because in death, as in birth, are these simple beings most vulnerable.
So, this has been my purpose all along?
No. You were just the first to ask why.
But you still have not answered my question.
And you have not yet learned that I do not work in that way. But you have an infinite amount of time to answer that question yourself.